Okay, I think this is live. I'm just going to be here to talk about Darko, his introduction to the team, all that good stuff, and some of the conversations that, even Dan Tolzman and Masai and Bobby, as they made themselves available afterwards to kind of ask conversation or open themselves up to conversations. The first little nibble that I'll give is that, hey, they interviewed 15 people in the process of trying to find the head coach, and Darko was not the favorite for a long time. And that also meant that, like, he had to impress over and over and over again in a bunch of different scenarios, whether it was having being interviewed right after losing in the playoffs with the Memphis Grizzlies, having to kind of put his hurt feelings about that to the side and become come prepared and make sure that he was available for the Raptors, and even going farther and farther down the process and all that kind of stuff. But basically, I just want to let the comments populate. I was there to ask questions, to talk to some of the people, and if anybody cares to know what I think about something that has happened or that you think might have been talked about without microphones present, feel free to ask away. But I think it was fun. It was good vibes. The Raptors clearly doing a big balloon. It was at Jurassic Park, MLSE Square, whatever they call it now, bringing everybody in. There's quite a bit of pageantry. I don't remember Nick Nurse having something like that when he came in, which doesn't speak to how they valued Darko or how they valued Nick at the time or how they valued, Dwayne Casey back then. But it certainly does mean that it means that they wanted to make a show of, Darko coming in and it being something that, like, hey, this is something where it's a turning of the tide, turning the page, whatever you want to call it. It's a signal of renewal. It's something that they're going to partake in, and that it's not just Darko, but it's the organization is looking for a fresh start, and they celebrated outside in the heat, and it was okay. Most of the questions that were asked of Darko, I think, were it was like fluff. Everybody's just trying to get to know people. Darko, this is his day. He's there. He was really excited to be up there. You could see it on his face. He is only the second coach ever, European born, head coach in NBA history. This doesn't happen often. Kokoskov, before that, Igor, he only lasted one season. And obviously, per the Raptors and most NBA teams, they don't announce the terms that coaches agree to. And so if you hear if a coach has agreed to a certain amount of years or if a coach has agreed to a certain amount of money, that's typically from their agent who wants to represent more coaches and is saying like, hey, I got this guy a bag. Monty Williams making like 12 million. That isn't Detroit saying we gave Monty 12 million. That's Monty's, team saying like, hey, we got this coach 12 million a year, that's pretty gnarly. That's like the mid-level exception. Actually, more than the mid-level exception. I'm not sure exactly what it'll be set at this year. But anyway, we don't know the terms of Darko. I do think it's like 4 or 5 years though, if I'm not mistaken. Pretty lengthy. I think that does nod to them wanting to take a longer approach, although this is of course going to be something where the Raptors, they take everything in stride and they try and see like, hey, uh, maybe a trade presents itself, maybe it's advantageous for the team, maybe it offers them an opportunity to go down the road of rebuilding or retooling. And also, with all of that said, it's very important for the team to manage both lanes in the eyes of the league. If other teams think that the Raptors are dead set on rebuilding, they lose leverage in the market, trades and creating sign-in trades, anything like that, and they lose that punch, as far as trying to sell players on a certain version of the team. All of this stuff is still in flux, all of this is still up in the air, and Masai was asked about it afterwards because, Masai had a couple questions during the presser that, it was just kind of like, "Hey, did you know Darko prior to this? Were you?" And, they said that they had met during this process and that, they hadn't really crossed paths before, even though that Masai has a past of scouting in Serbia. Darko would have been too young for them to kind of intertwine at that point in time, and that was kind of what Masai was asked about, and then afterwards, when we all gather around and, everybody's talking to Masai, you ask, like, "Hey, what are the personnel moves coming up?" He stiff armed that stuff. Uh, if anybody here wants to know about draft prospects, not only from PR but Masai himself, they're not telling anybody. Masai says during the Wojnarowski era, they try and keep everything mum's the word. I don't know why. Like, I look at the Washington Wizards and I see a bunch of, media gets to go there and talk to the players and, like, say Cason Wallace goes to Washington and he works out for the day and, the it's open. You get to watch these guys go through drills, you ask them questions afterwards. And sure, you might say, "Well, okay, maybe the team wants to keep everything close to their chest, but other teams will know. Of course, other teams will know who you're working out." Asks from Sarkis, "Who are the assistant coaches?" Nobody asked Masai specifically. Nobody asked Darko specifically. Nobody asked Bobby specifically, as far as I know. But I did ask a few other people who aren't necessarily decision makers, but they are in the know. And they said that the Raptors are just in the process, and they did it tongue in cheek. So they're not willing to let any of that go at this point in time. So no news whatsoever on the assistant coaches. Back to the draft stuff. The Raptors, they don't want to let anybody know who they have coming in. Basically, what you have to rely on is for people like Doug and Michael Grange and, guys like that to, kind of break news in that regard. I like I'm not hearing a ton of stuff about guys going to Toronto to work out. You basically have to rely on, like, newsbreakers, and you have to rely on maybe like Jet Howard, he came to Toronto to work out. How do we know? He posted it on his Instagram story, and sometimes you just have to wait for that. When are we going to hear from Bobby? There'll be quotes surfacing throughout the rest of today. He did have a media availability. It was just not done in the presser. We all went over and huddled in the shade. The question I asked Bobby specifically was, how did Darko sell Bobby and Masai on his vision of the team with Scotty? And he kind of just punted that one away. He said that Darko has a history with development. They liked what he said. I asked for specifics, but he wanted to get out of there, and he didn't really answer that. But I also asked Masai specifically about an approach in development that Darko has spoken about before, and I asked Masai, like, "Hey, what do you think about this given your background in scouting and development?" And he, again, punted it away and said, "I don't know, you have to ask Darko, he's the genius." One of the biggest things I'll talk about, somebody mentioned vibes. It was There is clearly a reverence from Masai for Darko. They were really impressed with him, and I also think that Darko is a guy who, more so than a lot of other coaches, you can go read, like an academic article on the pick and roll. You can listen to an hour and 15 minutes of him talking about how he wants to input, how it helps to implement offense in concert with players, all that kind of stuff. And, he has a 2.5 hour Q&A where he's just talking about basketball minutia. Lewis and I did a full episode kind of diving into some of this stuff, a little bit more specifically if you want to go watch that. Lewis has a lot of really interesting insights about it as well. But among that, you don't really know what's going to happen. I did ask about defense for the philosophies because he has publicly commented on a lot of the things he wants to do offensively. We're talking like point 0.5 players. We're talking about spending a little bit more time up above the break, manipulating nail defenders more often so that drivers have more access to go middle or to take baseline as opposed to spacing out specifically below the break and maybe not being in the corner, is that you kind of limit your driving capabilities, and teams are a lot better at tracking the cuts from that area of the court relative to the 45 cut. He's written about that. That's something that he pays attention to, and that is different than what the Raptors have been doing as the Raptors went to pursue more offensive rebounds. in prior seasons, what they did a lot of the time was they had less spacing above the break and just would put guys below the nail, even double guys up, one in the corner and one in the slot, so that they could hunt for offensive rebounds. I don't think that Darko is as into the jerry rigging the possession battle as Nick and co have been over the past couple years. We don't know who is going to be on Darko's team of assistants or anything like that. Have I been offered the lead assistant gig? No. I don't I will never coach at the NBA level. The intelligence and information gap and knowledge gap is unbelievable. Do I think Darko's offensive style will fail if the Raptors don't greatly improve shooting talent and performance? They have to improve shooting talent. That is unequivocal. That is very important. One would hope that they do that somewhat with the guys they bring in the draft. Perhaps, uh, depending on what trades might be made, guys walk. There's a situation where the Raptors can get 20 million in cap space. Now that situation means that there's more talent going out the door than there is coming in because the 22 million being opened up means everybody's off the books. Like there's not a lot of guys coming back, and those guys are valued in the league. I know the fan base is not big on Fred, but Fred is probably going to get well, he's definitely getting more than 22 million a year. He's probably getting more than 26 million a year, and I don't know at what term, and I don't know if it's gonna be with the Raptors, but I don't think they or he know that yet. That was also something that, he was asked Bobby was asked, like, "Hey, what's the situation with Fred?" Said he talked to him today. He declined the player option, obviously, and, conversations will be ongoing. We're still a while out from free agency. Conversations are had by, legally CBA, Raptors and Fred, and they are no doubt happening illegally between Fred and other teams. Um, People will jockey for position. A market will be set, then things will happen on July 1st or whenever, free agency starts. Why we don't have an aggressive question? I think we have to ask sometimes aggressive questions. We are so nice to coaches and players like Philadelphia reporters. Okay, so I think part of this is that a lot of reporters and a lot of the media that covers the Raptors, it's the same company, you know? That's going to be that's gonna be something that matters a little bit. Why aren't I like a hard ass? Because Raptors Republic is independent. The Raptors, I get credentialed. It would be insane if they took a credential away because I was asking super hard questions. I ask some hard questions in the terms of laying out the reality of what's happening on the floor. But as far as the interpersonal stuff and digging for drama, that's not my writing style. That's not something, and also digging around for like transactions and being like, no, no, give me the truth. That's not my specific approach. Now, I get Nurse was famously annoyed with me all the time because I'd ask specifics about schemes and all this kind of stuff. And those were hard questions for players and coaches because they don't want to give too much away, even though everybody in the NBA knows everything. Something they tell a reporter isn't going to ruin the game plan. But some of it is that like employees work for the same thing, and some of it is like, you know, it really depends, it depends on what you want out of what you're covering. Like Steve Simmons, for example, comes in from the Sun for like 4 games a year, and he's gonna ask, like, a question in kind of a jarring manner, and he's going to ask it the way he wants to ask it, and it's gonna be about the piece he wants to piece to write, and he's going to write a different piece than me. His is going to be more about, like, interpersonal stuff or failures or successes, and it's gonna be very narrative based. Um, and, like, in Philadelphia, I know you're probably referencing, like, the guy who asked about James Harden coming back and Nick Nurse saying, "James is a great player," and him saying, "You didn't answer my question." Um, Nobody did that. Presumably, I would guess, because it's Darko's day, he wasn't the one who negotiated Fred's contract in the past, but people did ask both Masai and Bobby today about Fred, and they didn't, like, hammer down, say, "You didn't answer my question." But I think that there's a belief and an acceptance that the front office is going to negotiate over the month, and they're not going to tell us. Like, just because a Philadelphia reporter said, "Hey, you didn't answer my question." I mean, he was being tough, but that doesn't mean Nick is going to say, "Okay, yes, we're signing James Harden," or something like that. So, I don't know, it's very personal and interpersonal. It's not, particularly easy. Uh, pecking order for press conference questions: first Doug Smith, second Grange. They always ask boring softball questions. So this is I don't think so because, it didn't work the same way in this one because, there were only so many questions that got to be asked, but a presser, a scrum is like a communal thing. Those guys ask the questions to kind of get the ball rolling, and then that means, in the middle or at the back end, I get to ask a hyper specific one because at media day last year, I had the first question for Pascal, and every other player got like the, "Hey, how was your summer?" All that kind of stuff, and I go specifically into your pick and roll frequency was this during the regular season. It was this during the playoffs. How do you think this will affect you as a player and, help you take that next step and all that kind of stuff? And, we did get the top 5 player quote out of that, but it also was a little bit jarring. So yeah. James Welch, Masai has stopped doing interviews the past few years and shut the fans out. He did one today. He did a fairly lengthy one at the end of the season as well. Okay, super optimistic, silly question. When will Darko actually start coaching? I know he said he's spoken with a few players, but when will they start working together? I asked about Darko and what he'll be doing at Summer League. He's expected to be there. I wanted to know if he would coach summer league because he's done it 3 times before. He coached the Grizzlies in 2021. He coached, the Thunder in 2015-16. He was an assistant coach for the Spurs on their G League teams from 2004 to 2011, as well as a scouting consultant. He talks about development, loving it. That's where his love for the game grew, but they didn't think he would be coaching at summer league. Although I think that there's an expectation for him to be there. Is there a chance of more man-to-man defense compared to all out switching we did past 2 seasons? So this is where I asked, just to give you the quote. Basically, I asked Darko, what are the defensive principles you have? And so he said, we want to protect the paint. Well, firstly, he said that they are a more versatile defense now with the guys they have on the roster. That probably includes 1 or 2 of the guys who are pending free agents, but that they are a versatile roster, that they can play more at home, but that they can switch in some regards too. Uh, After the All-Star break, the Raptors under Nick Nurse were better at protecting the paint, they were better at limiting corner threes, and they were better at kind of sending things up court to above the break and limiting shots at the rim. So Darko can actually come in and play a very similar scheme, and he also promised, he said, like, "Hey, we're gonna have a good defense next year." Promises maybe. That's what he said. And so if he could run something very similar to what Nick was running to end the season, and it would seem like a big change because you'd have it over the course of a full season. Jakob Poeltl makes a really big difference in that regard. But as far as what he labeled, he said that, he wants to pack the paint, he wants to limit corner threes, and he wants late contests on wing threes. Now, I know for some people that might sound like, "Hey, that makes a lot of sense. That's just regular basketball." But that's actually different than what the Raptors were doing for about, before the, I guess, post All-Star break run with Jakob Poeltl for like 14 months of basketball. They were not protecting the paint all that well. They were rotating to the paint from elsewhere, kind of indoors. The term is democratic rim protection, and that those hard rotations are what created a lot of the open corner threes. If you play a little bit more conservative and rely on one guy to defend the rim, a la Jakob Poeltl, you can stay at home, especially in the strong side corner for defending corner threes, and you can zone up the weak side corner. And if you have a really good player on the weak side, like maybe it's OG, maybe it's Pascal, who can cover a lot of ground and, really watch the eyes of the guy on ball, then those weak side zones can be super effective and you can limit the attempts in the paint, especially in the restricted area, and you can limit the corner threes as well. Keep forcing guys to shoot the above the break threes, and then presumably you push them into the back end of the shot clock. You're going to get a lot of those one dribble, two dribble 19 feet to 14-foot pull-ups at the end of the shot clock. That's a really good defense. The Raptors had games where they were able to achieve that. I think they have the personnel to achieve that, and I think that's probably something close to what Darko is going to want to do. He also said that he's happy to sit down with me and walk through the Raptors' defensive X's and O's. Now, maybe he gave me one of these, right, and I gave her a back. I was like, "Darko, thank you, my guy. This is what I've been waiting for." Nick never wanted to answer my my X's and O's stuff. He hated it, truly, he did, and, I kept asking, and if Darko is truly willing to answer some of that stuff, I will be very happy, even if it means that he doesn't actually sit down with me and walk through, X's and O's. Do I think Darko can guard me? I do think Darko can guard me. He looks pretty agile. Do I think Darko being brought in as a developmental coach is a hint towards a retool around Scotty? I think it certainly could happen that way. In the Raptors organization, there are people who have said that the Raptors think that Darko is a guy who could operate on either timeline and work as a coach. And what that means is like Darko is a guy who has had a lot of success getting buy-in from stars in the NBA. Maybe most notably is Devin Booker. This is, a testimony. Darko has talked about that. And, that's a really big deal, obviously, for him to get a buy-in from Devin Booker and to get Devin, something Lewis addressed as well, Devin being one of the best in the NBA at low touch, high efficiency superstardom, because Devin, honestly, he works within the framework of the Suns offense, which Darko, coming in with Monty, helped set up, and they started running less pick and roll, more Chicago action, and pistol. They called it auto in Phoenix. You can actually go watch, kind of a film breakdown of them doing that on YouTube with Basketball Immersion. But getting into those plays where there's a few more actions where they can rely on as counters, and they can also put defenses on the back foot instead of starting out as just a strictly pick and roll defense. All this kind of stuff is super important. And to get buy-in from stars on that, I think developmentally, sure, he can develop guys. He's done it for years and years and years across, different mediums and different leagues and different places in the world, speaking different languages. But as far as being a guy who can get high level players to buy in and play the way that he thinks will be the most conducive to success, I think that he's going to be capable of doing that as well. So I don't think Darko signals any which way the organization is going to go. What I do think will happen is that hopefully deals or paths will present themselves to the Raptors, and Darko will be comfortable doing either. I see people asking for a rebuild and others for retooling. What are your thoughts now that he's given his vision? I think developing the bench is a must while unlocking established players. So this is something that both the Grizzlies and the Suns, his past 4 years for him, have done exceptionally well. And with freedom within it is typically really good for players who don't get a ton of the ball. If you can start plugging guys in to run your actions who they understand the same reads, they can play within that framework, it's a lot better for a guy like, Malachi Flynn. I'm not exactly sure what happens in his career going forward. I know he had his deal guaranteed for next season way back in October. He'll be on the team for about 4,000,000, but a guy like that, Cameron Payne is maybe a really good example, who started thriving in Phoenix under a lot of these framework actions where a lot of the reads were, intuitive because you go over them in practice. You're like, if the defense steps up here, this is where the ball goes. I cut off right here. If the defense steps up here, the ball goes out here. I go right here. If the defense doesn't step up, I turn the corner. These are the reads that are made available to me. And this opens up places for me to kind of freewheel and become a shot maker. And Cameron Payne, for example, was great in that. With the Raptors, a lot of their actions not having that many counters to them, at least in practice, or at least in the games. I'm not sure what they ran in practice, but a lot of stuff for the Raptors flattens out and breaks down into isolation or a throwback to one of Fred or Pascal for them to isolate. And that gives less freedom to guys on the bench. And that means that guys on the bench don't have as many reads available to them, don't have as much freedom afterwards to try and create advantages or make shots on their own Miami is a really good example of this too, guys having freedom and then playing above their heads for some time and then creating a more robust floor for themselves. So I would expect Darko, as he said, that he doesn't like playing point 0.5 basketball, teamwork, all that kind of stuff because he thinks it's the best way. He thinks he said he likes playing that way because he thinks that's what players like best. And if the Raptors need anything offensively for their bench and developing guys, it's for them to believe that they're going to get the ball, touches, they're going to be able to make a difference on offensive possessions, and that will hopefully also this, age-old adage, create more buy-in on the defensive end as well. I think that that's all really, really important. Um, did anyone ask Darko if he'll have any input into the Raptors draft options? Does he have preferences on the type of players he would want to draft? This was not asked. There weren't that many questions asked. I think it was, like, less than 10, to be honest. It really was my question was one of the only, and there has to be questions about, like, "Hey, welcome to the city. It's his day." Uh, the questions for Darko weren't too heavy on, like, expectations and all that kind of stuff. It was more so like, "You're this is history for you, how do you feel about this? What made you want to do this? How do you feel about Toronto as an organization?" Nobody asked any questions about specifically who he wants to draft or anything like that. I'd have to assume he would, and many other people would like a shooter. This is also something that Masai talked about when we were off to the side. Masai said as they brought in 15 different people to interview for the coaching candidacy, and as, Kenny Atkinson and Sergio Scariolo went from favorites to no longer being favorites, and then it being Darko, and they learned a lot of Masai said they learned a lot about their team by talking to assistant coaches who said that they liked a lot of the things that the Raptors were doing, but also it gave them a lot of insights into what they were doing that they weren't doing well, and hopefully they take that to heart, and I'd assume that if a bunch of coaches came in and started interviewing, one of them being Steve Nash, one of them being JJ Redick, who Masai said they had a really interesting conversation. I would hope that and maybe a coach that coached against them this year, right? Like Charles Lee or something. Somebody said, "Hey, it was really easy to guard you guys for a lot of possessions this season." Like, Pascal is a wizard on ball sometimes, yes, but we had a really easy time kind of playing team defense. A lot of times we take 2 guys to guard the 4 other guys on the floor, and 3 guys have to walk in really close to Pascal because there wasn't a ton of shooting on the floor. Um, you'd have to think that shooting is at the top of the docket for the Raptors. They did work out Jett Howard. Jett Howard is, like, a tremendous shooting prospect. The expectation is he's going to be a very, very, very good shooter. So, yeah, nothing from Darko, but kind of, I don't know. I guess nothing from Darko, but I'm trying to piece together commentary from all this other kind of stuff. My audio is internet. Oh, I guess I'll check and see what's going on with this. Oh, hey, okay. Is that better? Does anybody have feedback at this point in time? Um, okay. I guess just keep talking. Okay. Did Darko mention any specific off-season plans for himself or players specifically to work on? No, nothing like that. Again, he was asked like 10 questions at the presser, and I couldn't say the question I asked was the basketball question. A lot of it was about the move, the interview process, wherein they didn't really reveal a bunch of the stuff that they talked about. But I do think that it was important to mention that Masai afterwards and Bobby afterwards had a lot of reference, especially Masai, for what Darko has been doing, his path to the NBA, and his acumen, professionalism, and intelligence, all that kind of stuff. Um, JJ, yeah, JJ, I think just they had a good conversation about basketball and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that it I don't think that every candidate of the 15 came in and changed everybody's, brain chemistry about basketball and completely blew people away. But I seriously do think, um, seriously do think that it's a good learning opportunity, and a lot of the people who were suggesting that the Raptors were taking their time as a means to gather info and intel from different people across the league, I guess that's what they were doing. I don't know if they were serious about all 15. I don't know if some of the guys they just kind of wanted to get, that would be an interesting person to talk to, but at the end of the day, it ended up being Darko. It sounded like talking to Masai that Kenny and Sergio were at the very top of it, and that, Sergio was in heavy, heavy consideration. I'm not sure what happened with that, and Kenny Masai has a massive background with like, they did a lot they scouted together overseas, they've known each other for a long time. Masai says they grab dinner together, they catch up all the time. That is obviously a leg up for Kenny Atkinson, over a lot of other candidates, but it didn't end up being Kenny, and, obviously, it ended up being Darko, and just from what I've seen from Darko, I like a lot of what I've seen. He is more available publicly for trying to find a coach's, like, ethos and their principles and what they believe in basketball. How many other head coaches in the NBA have, like, 6 hours of audio that you can just walk into on YouTube and learn a ton about basketball? Some of it isn't going to be Some of it is going to be completely accessible to everybody, and, some of it is gonna go over people's heads, but, that's kind of I guess that's how that shakes out. Is Darko moving to Toronto right away? I think he's here now. Uh, there's obviously stuff happening over the summer, and there will be summer league, which again, I think he'll be there, but, yeah, I think that Darko, he's in Toronto, he's ready for the move. He said, "We the North," so he's locked in. Who do you feel he's drawing X's and O's for? A club gunning for playoffs or a significant number of new bodies he's trying to assimilate into a healthy culture? Again, as I kinda talked about earlier, I do think that, damn, the mic is really not working? That's crazy. This has never happened before. I do a lot of podcasts all the time. My apologies to everybody. Let me check the settings. Okay. I guess, yeah. Sorry about the microphone, everybody. Um I guess, yeah, sorry for any of the microphone uneven parts of it. But yeah, basically, I've only done this I did one after Nick got fired, and then I talked about it for a while and nothing, yeah, static when I move the cable, I guess that would make sense. Okay, anyway, James Welch, my apologies. But Darko, I think when you look at I'll just give the rundown on Darko then. The offensive principles are that he wants to move the ball a lot, and he wants to play in a team concept. He wants to work with a lot more guys in motion above the break. A lot of this points towards stampede cuts. A lot of this points towards the 2 against 1.5 or 2 against 1, you know, advantages that come when when a team is overloading on a strong side pick and roll. You get it to the weak side as long as people are in that point 0.5 second motion, as long as they're making quick decisions, putting the ball on the floor quickly, like Pascal Siakam used to do before he became the isolation hub, like we've seen Scotty Barnes do on occasion, but he's not much for stampede cuts, like Precious Achiuwa do every once in a while, and like we've seen OG Anunoby do every once in a while. I think he can get by it. And as I said earlier, this is something that he was able to do with Devin Booker, and this is something he was able to accomplish with John Morant, with Desmond Bane, and a bunch of different players, across a bunch of different places. He has a ton of history with a bunch of different coaches. He credited Scott Brooks. He credited, like, a whole host of Serbian coaches. Lute Olson at the University of Arizona was a big one. Coach K at Duke, he spent time under both those guys. Not formally, but he spent time learning at both of those places. And, the Thunder, big time Scott Brooks, Monty Williams, Taylor Jenkins. These are big names in coaching, and this is a guy who he he had to accomplish a lot to get over the hump that is or the invisible wall that a lot of European coaches face or European-born coaches face, and he's only the second one ever. And he did that by being extremely diligent in how he approaches basketball, extremely player-facing in how he approaches basketball, and he wants to make sure that it's the players, that's who he puts forward. He's trying to get because player success is coach's success. Basically, that's how it shakes out, and that's how it works. But, Jaren Jackson Jr. is a guy who had a lot of success with him on the side of the bigs. Desmond Bane in, Memphis said he had a lot of success with him, as far as making playmaking reads. Desmond Bane was a shooter before he even came into the NBA, but some of the on-ball stuff, some of the quick decision making where he's able to, turn what used to be dead ends into drives, that's also from working, in the Grizzlies system. That's from becoming more diligent about being a quicker decision maker. Zaire Williams, it's, we're still out on that. We'll see what happens with Zaire, but I think that a lot of people are intrigued with him as well. As I said, Devin Booker in Phoenix, campaign in Phoenix. So there's a bunch of good stuff happening, and the players that showed up, Koloko, Jeff Delton Jr., Precious Achiuwa, Ron Harper Jr., Joe Wieskamp, and I think that's it for who showed up. Oh, Delano Banton as well, and Delano Banton got a shout out too. So, it's not like the biggest names, but those guys are around Toronto. They came to support their coach. He seems like a really nice guy. The testimonials I've heard, I know, a few people around the league, some of them have worked with Darko. They said that he was great, and there are people who not only I'm assuming they know different people than I do, they also the testimonials about him from other people seem to be great, from players on wax seem to be great. Assistant coaches don't talk to media that much. So, if you hear good things about an assistant coach, it's typically because someone offered it up of their own volition. And Darko is a guy who's had a lot of different players offer up a lot of good things and laud him openly, publicly, and that can only be a really good thing. Seems nice. I expect him to get the buy-in that he's looking to get. I expect good things from him, and, yeah, I liked him a lot, and of course, I like him even more because he said he would sit down and do X's and O's with me. Obviously, that's a big deal. That's that's obviously what I want. Do I think any possibility of Scariolo, Nash, or any others as candidates joining as a lead assistant with Darko? I mentioned this, I asked about this, I didn't get anything back. I have not heard like, Scariolo is still coaching. It's still big stuff going on over there. Nash, I mean, that's just like there's nothing going on over there. I have no idea what's going on with that. So I have no indication about lead assistants. And honestly, like what we've seen assistants do, would Philadelphia have had like a ton of experience with Rico Hines? Not really, but Nick Nurse did, and so Rico Hines is going to Philadelphia. It's like Jesse Mermes left the Raptors way back when to go join Luke Walton in LA. These guys know people, and these guys, they have friends and they have like-minded player or like-minded coaches that we just can't know at this point. Once they come on staff, I think, like, the friendships and the camaraderie that they've held will become a little bit more apparent, but as far as reading the tea leaves, because there's no open commentary on who they're looking for as assistant coaches, I haven't heard anything, and I have no indication, so to all the people who wanted to do that, my apologies, I don't have any information. Yeah. Is Rico Hines really going to Philly? I do believe so. Yes. I do think that Rico Hines is going to Philly. I haven't heard anything about, Earl Watson or Trevor Gleason or anything like that, but Rico, I do think is going to Philadelphia. Buy-in from the players. Yep. The players who showed up are the players lobbying for playing time. I do think that that's true to some degree. I mean, the players who are in Toronto are the guys on the edge of the roster who want to be around the organization, who want to show their willingness to buy in, to be part of the culture, who are no doubt working adjacent to and alongside some of the guys that are being the draft prospects that are coming in. And also, you wanna show the organization that you're here in the city, you're a part of the culture, all this kind of stuff, and you want them to see your work. And I didn't like, they kinda went off and did their own thing as far as, the players afterwards. Like, they huddled around for, like, a short little while, but we were talking to Masai and Bobby at that point in time, and then the players went away. I was going to ask Jeff and Ron and Delano, like, "Hey, are any of you guys going to summer league to play?" But they had left at that point in time. So, I don't know what the summer league plans are for those guys either, but, it should be interesting. All this stuff is gonna come out in the coming days. I know everybody wants everything now, and I totally do get that, but this stuff is gonna come out regardless. The summer league roster, or not roster, the schedule comes out after the draft. They still have to do the draft. I'd assume that's where all the brain power is going right now. Like, as much as Darko is coming in and immediately starting to plan, the organization hired the coach, they did it. Darko will plan things on his own to some degree, and then as far as, the organization, they have to make sure they get the pick right, or they have to make sure they make the right trade. Um, there's a few open to them at this point in time, so we'll see what happens. Samson, it's early, but how do you feel like his communication style speaks to how he can keep a consistent level of accountability? Keep in mind Memphis with Brooks was shot happy. That's a good question. This is something that Sergio Scariolo had something really illuminating when he talked about as an assistant coach, he came to the Raptors, right? Kyle Lowry didn't talk to him for months. Months. Neither did Kawhi. NBA players are out and out stars with God knows how much money and so much talent. I'm not the best at what I do in the world. I'm, like, good at what I do. I'm not the best. NBA players, even if you're the 238th best player, you're the 238th best player in the world. It's tough to get accountability from these guys. These are adults who are they author their own, they forge their own path. You have to do it not in a domineering type of way. You have to do it in a, "Hey, I have good ideas, and I'm gonna sell you on my ideas because these ideas are good for you." I I do think Darko is going to be able to convince players of this, especially since there are a lot of players on the Raptors roster who are looking for this type of leap. They want the offense to become a little bit more egalitarian. They want the offense to change as far as, like, the dynamic. They wanna do all this kind of stuff. So the buy-in for those guys should be pretty easy. And as far as, like, a big wig like Pascal, provided he's with the team, Pascal is a guy who has played a lot of selfish basketball in his lifetime. And just because he played a lot of isolation basketball does not mean that he's suddenly a selfish guy either. Fred VanVleet also used to be like a, you get this many possessions a game. Most of the time, what you wanna be doing is running around, shifting the defense with gravity. It's not a guarantee that Fred comes back. I'll give my thoughts on him opting out once again right away, but, I do think that a lot of the guys on the roster should buy into this, and that after you have a season like you just did, where not only do you underperform all over the court, both sides, but you also have a lot of malcontent in the dressing room, and you have competing conceptions of how the offense should be played, and you have players who want a certain amount of possessions, and you want to do all this kind of stuff. Having a guy come in and preach like, "Hey, we're going to kinda shake things up, and the guys who were getting a lot of the ball, you're still gonna get a lot of opportunities, you just have to be a little bit more diligent with the ball." And you're still like, honestly, if it maybe it matters to a guy like Pascal, maybe it doesn't. I've never asked about this. But honestly, like, Pascal saying, "You're not going to have to work as hard offensively." Maybe you end up scoring 23, 22 points per game instead of 24.8. That shouldn't be that hard of a sell. It really shouldn't, and I think Pascal would be very gracious in doing that. Um, Fred, we don't know if he's back. We also know that, like, if he gets a contract, I think Fred will be much more malleable in that way. It was interesting what happened last year at media day. The question I asked Fred was like, "Hey, you have a bunch of wing creators on this team. You're the best shooter. Are you looking forward to playing more off ball and weaponizing your jumper?" And then I mentioned, of course, that he had, like, an insane run of catch and shoot shooting the year prior, his all-star year, like, 40, 50 games into the year, he was shooting 52% on his catch and shoot looks on insane volume. That sounds platonically like the exact guy you want next to these creator wings, not only for spacing purposes, but as far as secondary ball handling and weaponizing play finishing. And he said, "Hey, I'm a basketball player. I'll just play where I need to be." Then in the middle of the season, he starts saying like, "Hey, um, I need to be I need to play this type of basketball. This isn't working." And some of that I think is like he's seeing the off-season bag perhaps shrink a little bit. And he's also not healthy, and the catch and shoot stuff, he had an imbalance in his body, he has an injured hip, he's got a ton of wear and tear. It's just not fitting, and he's like, "Okay, how can I guarantee that I get paid? I need a bit more usage because I'm shooting 32% from 3." This is human stuff. If he gets paid, I do think, he'll perform better and perhaps in a way that is a little bit more friendly towards the wings on the team. But then again, I think, like, the pick and roll numbers post All-Star break between him and Jakob were really, really good. So, whether Fred stays or goes, that has to still be a part of the offense, obviously, because as good as Pascal and Scotty are at different types of offense, neither of them can run the pick and roll with as much craft or as much, propulsion gravity as Fred. So, yeah, and Fred opting out, he's that means nothing. Now, there's other things that are going around. Fred wants to make as much money. If somebody offers him, like, a lot more to get him out of Toronto, he probably takes that. He's going to try and get as much as he can out of Toronto. Of course, they have bird rights, they can pay him a lot of money, but him declining his option means nothing, like, absolutely nothing. He's going to make a lot of money, and he stands to make way more money declining it. So there's nothing of importance there. Um any word on who is playing on the summer league team? I don't have anything in that regard. I was thinking of asking around, but then the guys were gone, and, yeah. I feel like this is a pretty good place to end it. There's, like, 98 people in here. Thanks to everybody for kind of popping in and listening to me. I am really sorry about the audio. I have not had that happen before. Um, as far as Raptors Republic stuff, we're doing a live draft party, so I'll be there and I'll do a podcast from there. So if you ever want to come and chop it up with me on the podcast and all that kind of stuff, um, I'll be taking questions live from listeners and all that kind of stuff. And there'll be other Raptors Republic, like Trey, who I co-host the Trey podcast with. He'll be there. Lewis will be there. Like a bunch of Raptors Republic people. The last draft party created a viral moment where everybody was upset about the Scotty pick. I don't expect tensions to be that high for the 13th pick, or maybe they trade up and get the third one, second one. However, that apparently there are some teams looking to trade out of the top 10. Who knows? But it should be a fun, thing going on. It's a unique opportunity to help build community in the Raptors fan base. And for everybody who has, kind of been pushed towards online over the pandemic, it's a nice opportunity to get offline and create more tangible, friendships and relationships, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, just keep that in mind. I'll be at Summer League. So the questions that I have for Darko this summer, they don't end today. I'll have lots of questions for him when he's down there. So, and for the players, Masai and Bobby usually show up as well. So, look forward to that. There's also a lot more draft content coming. Stay tuned. Okay, thanks everybody. You're all so great. I appreciate you listening. Okay, bye bye.